Washington, D.C., in Northern Virginia. As a Marine, I was stationed at Quantico in the Pentagon. Lived on Capitol Hill for a little while. Did a little bit of grad work at Georgetown, but ran out of money, so I stopped doing that. Went to law school in New York, and I really missed DC for a little while after the Marines. I worked in the Eastern District of Virginia, and then with Maine Justice. Life took a little bit of a turn, or a big turn, following an injury in the Marines. And I joined private practice in New York when I left Washington. And things started to unravel, both with mental health, depression, anxiety, physical injury, and addiction. It was many moons ago, but oftentimes it feels like it was just yesterday. But we're really excited to be here and, talk about mental anguish, mental health, and non-economic damages, in the DC arena. I know how difficult, personal injury work is. I know how difficult it is to satisfy clients. And even though the bulk of my work was in criminal defense, I did quite a few medical malpractice cases and some regular personal injury stuff. One of the things I'd learned along the way was that the mental anguish piece, and when we're talking about PTSD, depression, anxiety, insomnia, and some of the other disorders we'll talk about, are often lost on attorneys, or at least judges and juries. I think there's a lot of room, especially with the sea change across the country in the legal profession, acknowledging mental health problems. And they're a huge part of injury. Oftentimes, I think more than physical injury, which people often can recover from fairly quickly, mental health injuries are not recovered from so quickly. And it's intricate, and I want to discuss that. I want to discuss also the particulars as we're going through this. I want you to think about building your case. How are you best going to build the case so that you can present it to judge and jury, if it gets to a jury? And so I'll highlight what I believe are going to be the key steps for you to improve your client's possibility of getting a good compensation, and the best practices for you when you're thinking about what's going on with this client and how are you going to present it the best way. So I'm going to get right into it, but I just want to say one final thing. And the thing is, I can't see you or hear any of you. So if you want to laugh at my jokes, just unmute. I don't know if Mary has to do it, but anyhow, so I'm preparing for this presentation, and I've done some different similar presentations. And I knew I was getting too far into the legal weeds when I found myself reading Restatement of Tort Second. And then Chief Judge Cardozo's opinion in Palsgraf versus Long Island Railroad. I don't know if you guys remember this from law school. It's when the fireworks and the scales falling off at the rail station, off the platform. I had to brief that in first year torts. I was terrified. And the professor used to make us stand up. And talk about PTSD. I told the professor, I said, reading Cardozo's opinion is like reading riddles after riddles. And unfortunately, he loved Cardozo, so it didn't really go that well. But anyhow, what I was thinking was, I'm going to jump right into probably the most common mental health challenge for people who have been in accidents or who have experienced a traumatic event, and that's PTSD. As I'm going, there's certain places I could probably stop comfortably and open it up for questions. Just check in with you guys, see if you have any questions. So if that's good, we'll get going. So again, we're talking about case building, and probably the most common thing we see as a result of accidents is PTSD. Keep in mind that, sort of a subset of PTSD is depression, standalone, anxiety, standalone, and a number of other things, night terrors, insomnia, disassociation with friends, family. These are all parts of trauma and the mental health component. So what we're thinking about is building that case by storytelling. And as we jump into this, and I know most of you know this as trial attorneys, it's all about storytelling. It's all about humanizing our client. And there's certain things that are particular with that to the mental health arena. One of the things I think that we need to do most is know our client on a much deeper level. And it sounds a little cliche, but if you have like a strict, say, a back injury or a neck injury, falling off scaffolding or car accident or slip and fall, we kind of get to know our clients and we understand the physical injuries. The mental injuries are much more complex. And they're also, as I mentioned earlier, they can be much more long lasting, which means increased damages and increased compensation. So we really have to get it right by understanding what the client's going through. So I'm going to talk about PTSD, but keep in mind, it's almost all encompassing. It's just the most common, so I figured we'll go with that one. I was surprised to learn 10% of American adults will be diagnosed with PTSD in their lifetime. And not just they'll experience, but they'll actually have a full diagnosis of it. So it's real, it's science, and we have people that are incredibly trained to recognize these, assess, diagnose, and we'll talk about experts and how that comes into your case as we're going forward. But I thought 10%, that seemed high to me. Clearly, PTSD starts with a traumatic event. And really that's about as far as your imagination can go, it can be a traumatic event. And if you have somebody that we're trying to hold responsible for that, it's very, very vast. And we have to understand that the thing with mental anguish and trauma is that the individual relives the event almost 90, and Andrew Woolwine's a clinician, he can certainly speak to this, but a huge percentage, probably 95%, end up reliving the event. Understanding what that reliving means. So in a deposition to say, isn't it true, or it's a fact that you relive this traumatic event, that's not enough, right? We need to understand exactly what we're talking about, exactly what our client's going through, specifically. What does it mean to relive that event? Well, I'll be sitting in my car or I'll be lying in bed at night, and I just had this feeling that this car is taking a left-hand turn into the intersection, and then I'm sitting there and it's so real, it's happening, and I hear the crunch and the airbag deploys and my body just whips forward. Okay, keep going with that. See, that's a good start, but really we want the details. So how are you feeling at that moment? Well, I break into a cold sweat, I start shaking, sometimes I cry. How often does this happen? It happens 3 or 4 nights a week. Well, when that happens, are you able to get any sleep? No, I'm not. Well, how does it impact your day the next day? Well, I go to work, it feels like I had this bad dream, this terrible dream that's just staying with me all day. So you understand what I'm saying? When we're talking about building the case, we're talking about storytelling, and getting the client to talk about those things is critical. And of course, first, when we're talking about witness preparation, this all occurs in the office. So picture yourself, you're sitting in the office, you do the initial consultation, and I wouldn't say you have to go that deep in on the initial consultation, but when you send that individual, and this is critical, send that individual to qualified therapist, psychiatrist, psychologist, and I hate to use the word hack, but in every profession we have them, it has to be somebody qualified who knows what they're doing, who's not just going to send them a bill and try to sign them up for 15 more sessions. It's got to be somebody all in who cares about their patients. Then now you have a report, and typically these reports aren't going to be done, in one session, or 2 sessions or 3 sessions. They have to be done over a period of time, over a course of treatment, several sessions, maybe in an inpatient setting or an intensive outpatient setting. But it has to lend it credibility and any expert or psychiatrist or psychologist worth their weight will tell you this, I can't make a diagnosis in 45 minutes, right? So, look for that. That's going to be critical, because when you bring that to the court, or you bring it into court and you bring that expert into court, they'll get destroyed on the stand if they make an opinion about PTSD or, severe depressive episode, whatever it is, if they've only had them for a little while. So think about that. That's very important. Now, and it's better for you because now you have a report that you have faith in. The judge isn't going to look at you like, are you kidding me? Right? So, and now you're sitting with the client, maybe the second or third session, you've already filed the pleadings, the complaint. Then you have to go over the diagnosis with the client, and the notes from the therapist, and really, delve into exactly what's going on with that individual. How has this accident destroyed this person's life? And talk to his or her spouse or significant other, talk to their children, bring everybody in and really get a sense for, on a deep level, how this has changed their life. This is a one-shot deal, as you guys know, and they've really entrusted us to do our best work. And I know that you guys do that, but having that report in front of you is critical and getting in deep. They're going to be talking about night scares. They're going to be talking about involuntary memories, just things flooding back into them, distressing dreams, flashbacks we talked about, but also talk about, has this brought you sadness? Has this brought you anger? Do you feel detached? Do you not like to go to the supermarket anymore? Really talk about in detail how it's impacted them. And here's why, because it's sort of the test run in your office when you're doing this, and maybe even have an assistant, a paralegal, a legal professional, they can also have conversations with the client. But once you get to depositions, now the sting a little bit, I'm going to talk about this in a second, is taken out of it. Because now they've already expressed it, they've even talked about it more, they're in therapy, right? So everything's kind of going well for them. The last thing you want them to do is stick them in a deposition where they're going to have a hostile defense attorney on the other side, or plaintiff's attorney, depending on who you're representing. And you want them to have that practice run. It's the same thing when I was, preparing for criminal trials. We would have witnesses in. It's not a coaching thing so much. I don't know. It's coaching light, I guess you could say, but it's not. It's just giving them a chance to express themselves and have a little bit of experience in doing it. So I'm going to caution you on one thing, particularly with mental health injuries. And the only thing I can really compare it to is when I was prosecuting and I had a sexual assault victim on the stand. Generally, if it was a younger individual, but it really didn't matter, adults too. In depositions and at trial, it's going to be very challenging for them to talk about this in open court, in front of people, in a little box, a little witness box, with the jury looking at them, or even if it's judge alone. It doesn't really matter. It's going to be traumatic. They're going to be reliving traumatic events and the consequences of those events and their mental anguish. Delicate kids' gloves, right? And there's certain things that you can do that I wrote down here that's really helpful. Okay, I notice with a victim of trauma, when I would be doing a direct examination of them, I would never go slowly enough. I was always rushing things. And sometimes I would get a little impatient, more on like pedigree questions, not at the actual event, when the questions wouldn't come fast enough. That was a fault of mine as an attorney. So my advice is, anybody who's experienced trauma, you almost want to put the therapist hat on a little bit, go slowly, be patient, and let them complete their thoughts and their answers. It might take a minute, but take breaks as necessary. But I'll tell you this, in front of a jury or whoever's going to be making the decision, or if it's depositions and it's a settlement later on, whoever's going to be making that decision wants to hear their answers, wants to hear it. And so it's not necessarily for dramatic effect, it's for the client. But it also, as a, an ancillary effect, it slows things down so people can comprehend what really this person's going through. And that's going to determine damages. So I think that's really important. If we're looking at some of the other things, if we're looking at characteristics relevant to damages, there's a lot of different things at play here. And one of the things that's kind of good about mental anguish and in the practice in DC, and also I think Virginia and Maryland as well, is that it's difficult to put a time limit. It's difficult to quantify what mental anguish damages are. It's a lot easier with lost wages, medical bills, because we can show up with invoices and those are easy to prove. This is not so easy to prove. It's also not so easy to predict how long this person's going to need therapy and need treatment. And that's why going back to having the most qualified psychiatrists and psychologists, master's level social workers, who have a lot of experience saying, for grief, for instance, it's a little bit off topic, but, for grief, you're not going to be done grieving a death of a close family member in 2 months, and chances are you're not going to be done, being fearful and scared and depressed and anxious following an accident or a traumatic event, in personal injury. So having an expert diagnosis, give an opinion, as to how long this could possibly take to resolve is critical. And again, it's in the experts, and it's doing the research to find those right people. It's the difference between, providing $1 sign for your client and providing 3. And I hate to put it that way, but we all know, that's our job is to make these people whole. So that's a huge thing. Talking more about,
McKenna, just to jump in there really quick, to talk real briefly, and just expound upon what you're talking about from the clinical side, from the psychological, neurological side, what we've been able to be successful in working with practices is be a subject matter expert to provide objective data for you guys to use in your court proceedings. And so one of the things that we offer usually within the first 24 hours to 72 hours of a treatment stay with us is a comprehensive neurological assessment. And so as Andrew continues to build upon how to build this case with mental anguish and other psychological disorders, what we really try to do is not go down the road of, all right, well, the client's just saying this, and we all right, as we're storyboarding this, like, we can provide evidence, from a brain standpoint that's objective, that you can present to the court, and we can show how there's cognitive deficiencies within that client. And one of the things that I really like about our psychologists, and I'll get to it later on in our talk, is working with traumatic brain injuries. Our psychologist that works with us did many different research initiatives with the NFL with their traumatic brain injuries, and brings that expertise to our program, and can assist you guys with really substantiating that case. So I wanted to just jump in there, just and share. On top of all of that, will help the client understand how to interact with trauma, anxiety, depression, things like that, through the clinical side. And we do that through a lot of different modalities. EMDR is one of them. So I just wanted to interject there real quick. Andrew, sorry if I threw you off a bit, but I wanted to add that. And if anyone does have questions that they're thinking of, throw it in the chat. We'd be more than welcome to kind of pause, address that, or I'm sure that you guys have some ideas as well. So thanks.
That's hugely helpful. And I have a tendency to ramble. I get really kind of passionate about this. So thank you for that. And what Andrew, I mean, it's such a good point, because what he's talking about in terms of the neurotherapy and the brain mapping, now we're able to bring objective data to the court. So it's not just one therapist's opinion necessarily, it's objective data. And certainly, you know, the opponent can, you know, find an expert out there to probably, you know, debunk any kind of data or attempt to, but this is pretty rock solid. You know, I've done the research and bringing, as you know, bringing objective data and say, well, you know, it's in the numbers, judge or jury. So that's huge, and I'm really proud of that work. In fact, we just as an aside, we're working closely with a client now at Transformations, personal injury case. The neurotherapy has been hugely helpful in identifying, you know, problems and behaviors, and gives us a chance to work on solutions for those, and you know, creating a benchmark and looking at progress over the week. So I'm very proud of that program, very proud, and I think it's really helpful for personal injury attorneys as well. And then the other piece is, and I'll just throw this out there, is that, you know, having people on staff with a legal background understand the challenges that attorneys face in terms of getting documentation, you know, quick communication, fast turnaround when you guys have a question or need clarification on something. You know, I'm certainly here to help that process. So, but we'll talk about that more. You know, and one of the other things I wanted to talk about was, you know, when we're in front of a jury and trying a case, and we have the witness on the stand, the client on the stand, or maybe a family member on the stand, or neighbor, you know, talking about these effects, you have to know that there's somebody on that jury that's had a major accident or a major traumatic event in their lives. And, you know, maybe they didn't hire an attorney, or maybe their case didn't settle, or they weren't compensated for it, but we've all been through something. And if you think about it, when I was talking about that thoroughness earlier, really it's almost like a search term, like a human interactive search term. When something comes up and it piques that juror's interest, or perhaps it's the judge has been through something, you know, it really hammers home. And this isn't a course on trial advocacy. I'm sure you guys are better trial attorneys than I was, but, you know, it's really, that's the piece, is getting to that juror. And I was going to go a little bit into voir dire, but, you know, we don't need to do that. But obviously uncovering someone who's had similar experiences. And that's really the purpose of being very thorough with your client and really getting to know your client deeply. So, you know, let me give you a quick example of how I experienced a car accident 3 years ago in Massachusetts. Guy ran into me in an intersection, both airbags deployed. I probably had a concussion. And if you can believe this, right, I didn't go to the hospital. I was treated on the scene, and the car was totaled. And I thought, okay, you know, Marine, I can handle anything, although my history proves I can't. But after a couple of days, I started having these awful nightmares. And I would wake up, you know, shaking, nervous, and I was literally reliving that event. When I went to my doctor after those days, he said, you clearly are suffering from trauma right now. I mean, it's textbook. It's a couple days after the event. Um, you know, more likely than not, if this is not PTSD, it could certainly be acute stress disorder or some lesser, they call them lesser disorders, but really they're not, you know, lesser diagnosis, I mean, but they're really not. So delving into that, when that client comes in, they might think for the initial, you know, assessment in your office, well, my neck hurts, my back hurts, my leg's broken. All right, that's okay. You know, let's address all those things in turn, but then really, you know, get to the level of comfort where you have that conversation, you know, and get in deeper than just a checklist that's handed to them by, you know, the legal secretary necessarily. You know, we want more. We want more facts and more details about that. And then another thing is, just going back for a minute, you threw me off, Andrew Woolwine. You didn't. But, you know, looking at other treatment modalities, you know, psychotherapy, we talked about neurotherapy with the objective aspects of that. But you're looking at, you know, cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, experiential therapy, EMDR, which is unique to trauma. Fascinating practice. And I would get into it, but I think we're probably a little bit limited on time. The point is this: there are a lot of different treatment modalities that might apply to your client. Going forward, okay, it has to be individualized. And know that, just, you know, for damages as well, it makes sense because, you know, someone's going to be watching and knowing whether it's legitimate or not. But really, for the well-being of your client, whatever treatment program or, you know, course of treatment that they engage in, you know, keep an eye out for it and make sure that an individualized program. There's so many different therapists, great therapists, but, you know, some not so great, you know, or not that experienced, or different treatment programs. Some are strong and some are not. And so you have to look for your client, you have to look for that individualized program where there's a full assessment, you know, because you want to get this right the first time for them. You know, this treatment, especially with mental challenges, is going to last a long time. And then throw in substance use disorder. And I want to talk about that for a minute. I'm just going to shift gears and talk about the legal profession briefly. But, you know, how many times have we seen a client who really didn't have a substance use issue get injured, experience a traumatic event, and start drinking? You know, that happy hour used to start at 5, now it's starting at 2 or 3 in the afternoon. And so it's very easy to see habits actually change the brain's composition and turn into an addiction. So it's something for clients we also have to be on the lookout for. And also that component where you have substance use disorder and co-occurring mental health problems are often treated, more often than not in my experience, are often have to be treated together. So, you know, when we're talking about damages, you know, treatment can be costly, you know, both in time, in money and insurance, and it can get complicated, but it's imperative that it happens. And so looking for a quality therapist program, absolutely critical. And then I'll say this: once you have achieved that and you feel confident in that, in my experience, there's no better feeling to go to the judge and say, this is what I've done for my client. This is where we are right now. And I think judges take note of that and will respect the extra mile that you're going for that. Can we open it up for questions just briefly, Mary, Andrew?
We have 2 pending here. If you go down, you can click Q&A. So we have two questions there, and one I'll kind of address. Doug, thanks for your question with the recommendation of forensic psychiatrists and psychologists. And as McKenna was saying, a lot of the individuals you want to vet and make sure that they're going to give you accurate and usable data especially when it comes to mental health. So all that to say, regretfully, we don't. I don't have that list on hand. Our program is located out of the DMV area. We are in Florida. We treat clients and individuals nationally, and we're looking to expand our outpatient services nationally. But right now we're not in that area. Mary, I don't know. I saw you unmuted. You might have that list as well.
I
Um,
do not.
Okay.
Sorry, Doug. Maybe on our listserv. You can pop that out to the listserv, and maybe one of our members will be able to help you out with that.
Sure. And the second question I will give to you, McKenna.
Sure.
Is that's a more lawyer question.
Sure. It's a great question about the termination. Basically, the question is, is it peer-reviewed, legitimate that PTS could be a diagnosis due to a termination, employment termination? More or less, that was the question. I clicked out of it, but that was it. And very interesting, because I know in New York State and in most jurisdictions, if the termination is lawful, okay, and it could be a transfer too. That's come up in cases I've seen and read. If it's lawful, then typically you're not going to be able to bring for like a workers' comp claim, PTSD, depression, anxiety. But with that said, oftentimes, if we dig a little bit deeper on the purpose behind the termination, if it is unlawful, if it's if it's retribution for not doing something, if it's certainly like a whistleblower situation, now you're talking about an unlawful termination. So digging into the weeds a little bit and getting a really good understanding of what's lawful and unlawful, I think many more cases could be brought under that theory if the attorney did a little bit more due diligence and found reasons. And look, you get a client in your office that's been fired, you can almost always, within 10 minutes, get the opinion from them, well, it's because I did X, Y, Z, and finding those things. So there are cases, and I've seen them certainly in New York and in other jurisdictions. I think Virginia, I've read some cases for that exact reason: unlawful termination, unlawful transfer, job changes, anything dealing with retribution, can be a cause of action for PTSD, depression, and the list goes on. So great question. Hope I answered it.
And we've seen, just to jump in there, I don't know if I can point to a specific piece of literature, but one of the things that we've worked with different practices is specifically within first responders. I'm not totally sure if the DMV area has a PTSD law for first responders where you can argue workman's comp or just mental health damages. But at least in the state of Florida and a couple other states, you can argue PTSD from specifically workplace. And if they were fired, there's absolutely room to litigate that.
Great. So I'll just wrap up with a few things, to talk about the statute of limitations, of course, 3 years in Washington, D.C., no cap on damages for mental anguish, and, which I think is really great. I think that, it's not necessarily the case in other jurisdictions. There's a few out west that are just unbelievably low. But, having the diagnosis, having a reputable expert to support their conclusions in the diagnosis, mental health issues aren't fixed in a month. They're not fixed in 6 months. And, the impact that they have on people's lives are just unbelievable. And, of course, everybody knows, shell shock, PTSD, people coming back from World War II. It's not that. It's something, it seems much less, than that, but it really isn't. And it's so common in injury cases. So, I know you wouldn't do this, but there are attorneys that would, that don't work in the personal injury field, that they might just gloss over something that a client's telling them. We really have to be good investigators and ask compassionate questions to look at those different things. So pain and suffering damages in District of Columbia, some of the factors the court considers, obviously severity of the injury, potential for ongoing consequences, and that's where the experts are going to come in, and hiring the right expert to do that. One of the things is whether the injured party had pre-existing conditions, and this gets a little bit sticky. I think this is going to be one of our greater challenges, but this is why a proper diagnosis, a credible diagnosis, can't be made in a session or two, because the therapist, we're asking the therapist to treat our client, our individual, but we're also asking the therapist to make some predictions and to answer the issue that we all deal with, which is causation. Did this particular injury result in the mental anguish, the mental issue, the depression, the PTSD, the anxiety? So to make that causal link, we know that we need that as attorneys in order to collect, in order to negotiate. And part of that's going to be the therapist working closely and, looking at the history, looking at the psychosocial history, and digging deep. And, but the therapist also understands that, well, they're not preparing for trial. They're not preparing for depositions, but they also understand that this person should be compensated more often than not. And I can't speak for them directly, but they deserve to be made whole as much as we can. So looking at, maybe a history of depression, traumatic event from childhood, how is that playing into the current injury versus is the current injury a direct result of the traumatic event, the accident, the car accident, the injury? And, having a therapist that's mindful of that and isn't just trying to rubber stamp something or say, oh no, this occurred back from the accident when he was 8 years old or she was 10 or something like that. Parsing that out is critical, because, the courts do look at, and certainly your opponent in court's going to look at, did this injury already exist? So I think that's another really important point. Are there any questions? I just want to shift gears for a couple minutes, but I want to see if you have any questions about mental anguish and the non-economic damages and how to build the case. I think we're good, right, Andrew?
I think so. There's
Okay.
no pending questions out there.
Okay. Okay, fair enough. One of the things I wanted to talk about, and this really does deal directly and indirectly with mental anguish and non-economic damages, personal injury. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about the substance use disorder, the development of addictions, and the development of mental health problems in the age of COVID. I don't know, if your phones are ringing off the hook with injuries. We know a lot fewer people are driving to work, a lot fewer people are showing up to work where there could be injuries on the job. But we do know that people are staying home more, and people are actually getting injured at home while working from home. And there are cases in New York, I can't cite them from memory, but I'm sure they're in all jurisdictions, but people are working from home, and what does it mean to have an injury on the job for workers' comp purposes, for whatever it might be, FMLA, whatever it could be. But looking at that, and then, so I mean, that's something that we should be aware of. And when you're talking to colleagues and potential clients, is, figuring out what your jurisdiction is doing with those cases, because there are a lot of them. And it could be something as simple as, on the way to the back bedroom to get the charger for the computer because you have a Zoom meeting coming up. Certain expectations put on you by your workplace, your employer. And this is not a subliminal message, Andrew Woolwine. But it's a real thing and it's happening. And the other thing that we're seeing a lot of is, which is a concern. I did a radio program this morning and the interviewer said, well, there aren't really there's not a lot of access to treatment and help for, mental health and substance use disorder. And I'm here to tell you and spread the word, that's not true. That's not true. It looks different. But there's absolutely help out there for your clients, for your family members, friends, neighbors, whoever. But when I heard that this morning on the show, I thought to myself, no, there is access and there is help out there. And I never want somebody to be sitting at home, working and depressed and feeling that there's not help out there. And then I'll leave you kind of with this thought, and we can open it up for like a real Q&A. In our profession, we're the number 2 profession, the legal profession, suffering from substance use disorder and mental health, behind doctors. And females in our profession are increasingly more at risk for developing substance use disorder, which is new. It's different from over the last decade. And there's a big stigma, and I talk about this nationally, there's a big stigma for attorneys to ask for help. Number one, we're supposed to be right. We're supposed to have our acts together. These things don't happen to us, they happen to our clients. Or they don't happen to our children. Those happen to somebody else's children. Realize that there's help. And there's all sorts of different confidentiality, provisions in different state jurisdictions, bar associations, reaching out certainly to me. I'm more than happy to help in any way, but asking for the help, bringing down the stigma, and making arrangements to move your docket, shift your clients, shift your appointments. Judges get it. They're going to understand that, and your clients, they'll understand continuances and adjournments. So not being preachy, I've been there, and there's a lot of stressors in our profession, but there is help, and there's people that understand what you're going through as an attorney, that can help you navigate that system. So I'll open it up for any questions, either mental anguish, and settlements, compensation.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, please, those of you who are attending, if you have any questions whatsoever, go ahead and post them. And if you don't have any at the moment, and if they do come up later, we can certainly post. And as a matter of fact, I should do that now. Both Andrew's information in the chat box. I don't know if you gentlemen want to go ahead and do that yourself in the chat box so everyone can see it, or the Q&A box so folks can reach out to you. If you don't want to do that right now, I can do it a little bit later. I'll send it out with the recording, but please feel free to do that. It doesn't look like anybody has questions at the moment. So Andrew W., did you want to add anything else? Were you going to speak for a little bit? I forgot.
In respect to everyone's time, I could go into the neuro a little bit, but I think that we covered what we wanted to cover as just kind of an overview, and certainly appreciate the opportunity to talk with you guys and the association here. And we look forward to having any and all conversations. I know, I forget if I think it was Doug who shared a recommended list of good quality programs, and we hope to to be considered, whether it's pointing someone in the right direction or assisting in any case. But that's about that. I also have I can ramble, but I'll stop.
Well, I thank you both. It was a very informative and interesting program. You are both very open to having people reach out to you. That's very apparent. And I hope that the members who are on now and the members who will watch this recording later on will feel free to do so. So I thank you, gentlemen, for your time. And please stay in touch. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Thanks,
Bye, everybody.
Bye.